In this video, I am going to be talking about the visual effects that are produced when an individual ingests LSD 25, or as it's most commonly referred to as, acid. So to even begin talking about psychedelics, you need to add some structure to what you're talking about. If you don't want to completely confuse or scare somebody as to what you're talking about, because psychedelics encapsulate such a broad spectrum of what actually happens that when you try to describe to somebody what it was like, it is just bouncing all over the place, a shot in the dark. So that's why I'm going to be specifically addressing the visual effects of LSD, because if I was to just try and talk about it as a whole, I would go on and on and on. So in the future I may make other videos on different aspects of the experience, but in this one I'm going to be talking specifically about the visual effects that it produces. And more specifically, I'm going to be talking about the effects that come about in the ranges of 150 or more micrograms of LSD, because it's around that range where it really starts to actually show its characteristics and do what it does. At the lower doses, it's more subjective and suggestible to the scenarios you're in, but at the higher dosage range, it is much more prominent and intense, honestly. So I've categorized it into two groups: the come up visual effects and the peak visual effects. I was going to add a come down category as well, but I kind of realized that the come down is basically a mix of the come up and peak visuals, but a lot less intense and almost like in slow motion. Not to mention, at that point you're used to what you're seeing. It's not really catching your attention or catching you off guard as much as it was during the come up. So that's why I didn't really add that third category. So I just got a bunch of bullets here of different things that I've experienced myself while on LSD, and I'm just going to kind of go down the list and talk about what they are each. So this is the come up phase. So this is usually the first visual effect that typically happens to me when I ingest LSD, which I call shadow shifting, which is basically you're watching TV or something, or just looking somewhere, and the lights, like specifically in a room, I guess you could say, a lit room, the shadowed areas of the room will begin to dissipate into light. Like, it almost looks like all the shadows have disappeared in the room, and it begins to shift the lighting in the room around, and it begins to look like there are shadows in places there shouldn't be, or just the shadows are moving around in general. It's this transitioning of the light focusing in your eyes, it seems. That's what it seems like to me. But it just appears like the shadows are dimming out or lightening up into light and completely fading away. Another thing, acuity enhancement and deeper saturations of color in the room. What I mean by acuity enhancement is it seems to be more details to what you're seeing or what you're looking at, and it begins to look just a lot more interesting, and it catch your attention. You can pick out each line in wood grain, or each fabric, each thread in the fabric of your blanket and stuff like that, or each pixel in the TV and stuff like that really begins to stand out, and colors may begin to get brighter or shift in hue slightly. The room might appear to be a different, just kind of general hue, you know. Another thing, this is the last one on the come up phase, is peripheral movement. It's not very distinct or formed at this point, but it can almost appear like things are falling or walking by or are out of place in your peripheral vision, and it can kind of make you like double take, like do stuff like that, check, like you could think you see like a cat in the room or something, or it looks like something is falling off the table but it's not actually falling. I've realized that quite a lot during the come up phase of my LSD trips. Not all of them, but a lot of them have had this sort of just peripheral trickery, I guess, is a better word for it. So the next category is the peak, which is basically where I just threw everything else visually that happens during the trip that I would consider a lot more intense than just coming up, you know. So these first 4 bullets right here are kind of specifically talking about the surfaces of what you see. So drifting. Drifting is when, say you're looking at a flat surface, and like this wood grain bureau right here, it could appear to be slowly moving like this, or moving apart, or moving any which way, opposite ways at the same time. It doesn't really matter, but it looks like it's moving. It's moving. It's just moving across the surface of itself, but it never really falls out of place. It always appears to be in the same position it was. It's probably because you're resetting your eyes, and it's kind of repeating the same repetition-like motion of the surface you're looking at. It does it on anything. Tree bark, wood grain, cat fur, carpets, blankets, walls, everything with any sort of detail appears to be slowly moving in some sort of way, whether it be up or down or multiple directions at once. And the longer you stare at it, this applies basically to everything during the LSD experience, is the longer you stare at it, the more prominent it seems to become. The next for surfaces would be warping. That's what I would call where like something appears to be like slanted or curved or like bulged out in a way that it usually isn't. Like a TV could look rounded off or look like it's slowly rounding off like that. It could be static, meaning it's still like stuck like that, or it could be slowly, progressively getting more and more distorted in that warping fashion. Like drop something. The next one would be breathing. I like this one. This one is pretty entrancing when you look at it, and really when it really starts to grow in intensity. But the breathing effect is where everything you're looking at appears to be slowly pulsing and going back down, and pulsing and going back down, and everything is doing it in a different speed or at a different timing, where it looks like random objects are just moving around like that, and it's got this wiggly, watery look to it, and you can see objects kind of like grow outward and then like reset, and like and then something else catches your attention and it's doing something else in that breathing like manner. And watching trees or grass or a tapestry or design of some sort during this breathing effect is very hypnotizing, honestly. You stare at it and it's just this flowing, breathing, like just transitioning appearance to it, and it's very, it's like it's giving it life. It's like it's breathing just like you are. That's kind of how you can think about it. Last one for surfaces is melting. This one doesn't really happen to me often, or even just on low doses. I really need to be out there to be seeing things melt. It's more common to happen in my peripheral, but it could appear that objects are dripping or drooping in a melting like liquid manner. And that's just very intense to see in front of you. It gives me this feeling of like a pastel painting, and everything is just moving downward. It's all just kind of like oil and water, melting together. And it's not really, it's usually brief when you see it do this sort of melting thing, or it just happens really quickly and then it's gone. But I could imagine that if you're very under the influence of it, it could progressively get more and more distorted without actually transitioning back to normal, what it actually looks like. So the next would be embedded patterns. I wanted to mention also, I tried to make this in the order of like how they come about to me. But the way these can happen at any given time during the experience, or one happens and the other doesn't, but there's not really an order to this. It's more just in order of intensity or magnitude or whatever. But anyways, embedded patterns in things where you're looking at this surface or the floor or just anything, honestly, an object, and it appears that there's this very intricate pattern built into it. It's like it's made of all these different lines and shapes and angles and shadings, and it's like you get the impression that it was designed that way on purpose, and there's this insanely intricate, complex design built into everything you're seeing, and you're realizing you've never picked up on these patterns before. And this also applies to the geometric shapes you see in things, the symmetrical geometry that you see overlaying everything, that all these shapes and patterns are just standing out when they weren't before. It's just this very intense feeling that like you're seeing the definition of the things in front of you, and you may pick out that it's not what it actually looks like, but like at times it feels like what you're seeing is the actual pattern of that object or surface. You just don't ever look at it in that way. Next effect would be morphing objects. This one is mind-blowing when you see it, when it's happening, because like you don't know what is actually happening. It looks like objects, multiple or maybe just one thing, are fluidly changing into different things, be it a different object or something that's not even recognizable at all. And it can happen to people's faces, it can happen to tables, it can happen to little things all over the table, or things on the TV, or rocks on the ground. They could appear to just be animals or something just entirely different. It's morphing through this kind of like seamless flow of different objects, be it recognizable or not. It's a pretty weird thing to see, where you're staring at your room, something recognizable, and a few moments later certain things in the room have morphed into completely different versions of themselves, to the point where you don't even know what you're looking at. Not to mention all the other stuff that's going on that I've listed as well, plus the things I haven't listed or haven't even experienced yet. But that's just the beginning of it. This effect, I really like this effect, the tracers or trails or shuddering effect. This usually happens to me on pretty high doses. I need to be pretty under the influence of LSD for me to get this tracer effect, which is it's probably one of the most common tripping effects, where you move your hand in front of your face and you see multiple hands behind you, and it could be like a solid stream of your hand behind you, or it could be like fragments of your hand, like just your fingertips or like your palm or something, or like the edges of your fingers, or it's never really distinct what it's actually doing, but it's this feeling that like where you're moving and things that maybe aren't even moving are creating this moving motion effect where you're seeing where it was just moving, whether it was moving or not, and it's a very mind-boggling. It's cool as hell looking to see things that are just kind of like repeating. That's the shuddering effect, is where things appear to be like multiples of it. I think it's called recursion. A lot of this stuff, a lot of the terms I got are from Psychonaut Wiki, which is basically just it does what I'm doing, covers the visual, physical, mental effects of psychoactive substances. So the next effect would be, this is the last one, faces, animals, and sceneries overlaying things. This is where you're looking at something and it almost appears that there are animals or people or like a beach or a mountain range or something like that that's not even what you're looking at, but you can very, very vividly pick out that animal or that person's face or that figure or that landscape or scenery that you're seeing, and it's really cool. Like, there was one time where I was looking at the clouds and it 100% looked like I was on a beach in Hawaii with palm trees and white caps on the water and white sand in front of it, and it was just such a, I was staring at it like, oh my god, like it looks like I'm in friggin' Hawaii right now, but I knew I was looking at the sky and it was just like, what? No. So another effect that I forgot to mention, which is really prominent throughout all the experiences, is color shifting, where the colors of things are slowly fading out and changing into entirely different colors, where my coffee cup could look purple and then blue and then green and then red, and I can't even really remember what color my cup actually is because it's like seamlessly transitioning through these random colors, and like it could be doing it while you're looking at it, or it could be triggered by like moving it around, like you set it down and all of a sudden it's just an entirely different color. But that's basically it for what I've gathered on the visual effects of LSD. If you could imagine basically all that shit happening at once in like a 2-hour period, sure, that's what the visual trip of LSD is like, I guess. At least in my opinion. Those are just describing each thing that I remember seeing, or you know what I mean, just trying to articulate that side of the trip. So that's it for this video. It was fun writing all this shit down, trying to just describe the ineffable experience that psychedelics are, and I hope you got something out of this video, and I will be back with more in the future.